Welcome to our deep dive
Oh, yeah.
into the JFK assassination. You've given us quite a stack of material to explore.
Oh, wow.
Excerpts from a JFK assassination research journal
Okay.
called Dealey Plaza Echo, with historical analysis, statistical probability arguments, eyewitness interviews,
Wow.
even some book reviews.
Oh, wow.
It's quite the mix.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to help you connect the dots, uncover hidden patterns, and
Yeah.
maybe even challenge a few assumptions along the way.
It's fascinating how this journal brings together so many different perspectives on an event that continues to captivate and perplex us. Let's jump right in with a piece that reflects on the death of John F. Kennedy Jr. back in 1999.
This one really struck me too. It argues that his death beyond the personal tragedy was like extinguishing the last ember of Camelot.
Yeah.
That hope of rekindling the idealism of JFK's presidency died with him.
What's interesting here is how the author connects it to a broader Kennedy obsession in American culture, this longing for a return to a perceived golden age. It makes you wonder, why do we cling to certain historical figures and moments, especially in times of uncertainty?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like we're searching for heroes, for symbols of hope in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. But let's shift gears now to something that uses math, of all things, to question the lone gunman theory.
This article uses statistical probability to analyze the official narrative. It calculates the odds of Oswald just happening to be in the right place at the right time with the means to carry out the assassination.
Hold on, are we talking about pure luck here?
That's what the author argues. The probability they calculated is incredibly low, like correctly predicting every winner in a 64-team basketball tournament.
Wow.
This really challenges the idea that Oswald was simply a lone wolf acting on his own impulses. It forces us to ask, if he wasn't placed there intentionally, how could so many unlikely events happen in just the right sequence for the assassination to occur?
It definitely raises some eyebrows,
Oh.
and it makes those who were in charge of protecting JFK look,
Yeah.
well, not very competent. Now get this, you also included an interview with someone who knew Jack Ruby personally,
Okay.
Shari Angel,
Right.
a former dancer at his carousel club.
This interview provides a unique perspective on Ruby, a figure often demonized in the aftermath of the assassination. Angel describes him as a complex individual, someone who treated her well and was even involved in charitable work.
That's a far cry from the image of the cold-blooded killer who gunned down Oswald on live TV.
Exactly, and her account raises questions about the official narrative of Ruby as a lone wolf acting solely out of grief or patriotism. Angel claims she witnessed events that suggest a much more intricate web of relationships and motives at play.
Okay, here's where it gets really juicy. Angel claims she saw Lyndon B. Johnson and Jack Ruby together at the Adolphus Hotel, the very hotel where this interview was conducted, just a few months before the assassination. If true, that throws a huge wrench into the official narrative.
Angel's account is certainly controversial, and it's up to each of us to weigh her testimony against the existing evidence. But it highlights the importance of considering all perspectives, even those that challenge the official narrative.
This is what I love about these deep dives. It's like peeling back the layers of history and discovering those hidden connections that make you question everything you thought you knew. Speaking of hidden connections, the next article you provided takes us back to a different Kennedy tragedy, the death of JFK's older brother, Joe Jr., in World War II.
This event is crucial for understanding the trajectory of the Kennedy family. Joe Jr. was the eldest, the golden boy, groomed for a political career. His death shifted the family's focus onto JFK, who might not have otherwise pursued the presidency.
It's a powerful what-if moment in history. The article dives into the circumstances of Joe Jr.'s death, a plane crash during a dangerous and experimental mission. It makes you wonder, did the Kennedys feel a sense of destiny, a need to prove themselves through acts of courage, even if those acts seemed reckless in hindsight?
The mission involved flying a Liberator aircraft packed with explosives and piloting it remotely to attack a German V-3 supergun installation.
That sounds incredibly dangerous. What went wrong?
That remains a mystery, but the article describes the plane exploding mid-flight, showering wreckage over the English countryside. The irony, and what makes this story even more tragic, is that the mission might have been completely unnecessary.
You're saying they risked their lives for nothing.
It appears the RAF had already successfully bombed the target weeks earlier. The potential pointlessness of Joe Jr.'s sacrifice just adds another layer of tragedy to the Kennedy family story.
It's a chilling reminder that even acts of heroism can be shrouded in ambiguity, and that the course of history is often shaped by events that might have been avoidable.
From one tragedy to another, you included an article that examines the chilling coincidences between the assassinations of Presidents Lincoln and Kennedy, specifically their vice presidents.
Oh, okay, that's a coincidence that's hard to ignore.
Both named Johnson.
Tell me more.
Both presidents were shot on a Friday. Both in the head,
Wow.
and both with their wives present. Their assassins were both known by three names and killed before they could stand trial. And of course, both presidents had VTs named Johnson.
It's like something out of a conspiracy thriller novel.
And it gets even stranger. Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's VP, was born in 1808, exactly 100 years before Lyndon B. Johnson, JFK's VP.
Now that's just too weird to be a coincidence. What are the chances?
It's certainly enough to make you wonder if there are unseen forces at play shaping history in ways we can't comprehend. Both Johnsons assumed the presidency after their predecessors were assassinated, and the article delves into the parallels in their lives and presidencies.
So we're not just talking about names and dates here, but actual patterns in their careers and the challenges they faced.
Exactly. Both men faced turbulent vice presidencies, with Andrew Johnson actually being impeached, and LBJ facing threats of impeachment as well. Both faced accusations of being involved in the events surrounding their predecessors' deaths. And what's particularly striking is the article's observation that despite facing similar circumstances, LBJ and forming the Warren Commission seemed to ignore the lessons learned from the inquiry into Lincoln's assassination.
It makes you wonder, did we miss an opportunity to learn from the past and potentially uncover a deeper truth?
It's a fascinating question to ponder. And while we may never know the full extent of what happened in both cases, the similarities are certainly thought-provoking.
It's like history was rhyming, if not repeating itself. Now, for something completely different, you've also included a piece of fiction, a short story that offers a unique perspective on the JFK assassination through the eyes of a teacher and his students.
Out of the Mouths of Babes takes place in a chaotic London classroom where a teacher uses a jackdaw educational package about the assassination to engage his unteachable students.
Oh, I remember those jackdaw packs. They were always a fun way to learn history. What happens in the story? Did the students just ignore the lesson?
Quite the opposite. They become utterly captivated, analyzing the evidence and questioning the official narrative with a level of critical thinking that even the teacher didn't anticipate.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What kind of insights do these supposedly unteachable students come up with?
They express skepticism about the lone gunman theory and the magic bullet. They question Oswald's marksmanship and the improbable trajectory of the bullet that supposedly hit both Kennedy and Governor Connally.
So are we saying a bunch of London school kids were smarter than the entire Warren Commission? This story really makes you question who controls the narrative and whose voices get heard.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound insights come from the most unexpected sources.
I love how this fictional story uses a seemingly simple classroom setting to explore those complex themes of historical truth, evidence, and the power of critical thinking. It's a reminder that sometimes the most engaging way to learn about history is to step outside the traditional textbook narrative and explore those alternative perspectives, even those that might seem outlandish at first glance.
That's the beauty of approaching history with an open mind, isn't it?
Yeah.
We need to be willing to question everything, to challenge the narratives we've been given, and to consider all possibilities, no matter how improbable they may seem.
And that's what this deep dive is all about. So let's continue our exploration of your source material and see what other hidden connections and thought-provoking insights we can uncover.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the JFK assassination. I'm eager to continue exploring the fascinating material you've provided.
Yes, let's pick up where we left off. Sifting through these excerpts from the Dealey Plaza Echo, we were just discussing how sometimes the most unexpected sources offer the most insightful perspectives. This next article takes a closer look at the concept of random chance and how it relates to the assassination.
It builds on the idea we discussed earlier about the statistical improbability of Oswald acting alone. If we accept the lone gunman theory, we're essentially saying that Kennedy's assassination was largely a product of coincidence.
So Oswald just happened to be working at the Texas School Book Depository when the motorcade passed by. That seems like an awfully big coincidence given what we know about presidential security.
Exactly. The author challenges us to consider the probability of a head of state passing within close range of an average citizen during their workday. Unless you work in a government building or a high-security facility, the chances are pretty slim, right?
Right. And remember, Oswald was a book depository employee, not someone with obvious connections to the president or reason to be on his radar. And to add another layer, there were reports of someone with a rifle in a sixth-floor window of the depository before the motorcade arrived.
Ooh. Those witnesses assumed that person was part of the president's security detail, which makes the whole scenario even more improbable.
If Oswald was the shooter, he was incredibly lucky that no one questioned his presence or noticed anything suspicious beforehand.
It just seems like one improbable event stacked on top of another. So what else does the article explore?
Well, it delves into the methodology the Warren Commission used to reach its conclusions. Remember, their mandate was to investigate the assassination, but there was a built-in assumption that they were dealing with a lone gunman from the very beginning.
So you're saying the investigation might have been biased from the start?
That's the question the author raises. They argue that this predetermined framework could have limited the scope of the investigation, leading to a narrow focus on Oswald and a dismissal of evidence that didn't fit the lone gunman narrative. That makes sense. If you start with a conclusion in mind, you're more likely to cherry-pick evidence that supports it and ignore evidence that doesn't.
Precisely. The author provides specific examples of how the commission downplayed or ignored eyewitness accounts that contradicted the official timeline or suggested the possibility of multiple shooters. And of course, there's the single bullet theory.
Ah, yes, the magic bullet. The one that supposedly zigzagged through both Kennedy and Governor Connolly.
That's the one. The Warren Commission leaned heavily on this theory to explain how a single bullet could inflict all those wounds. But many researchers have argued that the bullet's trajectory and the extent of the damage simply defy the laws of physics.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Sometimes the evidence just doesn't align with the official story no matter how hard you try. What this article really highlights is the importance of approaching any investigation with an open mind and avoiding the temptation to fit the evidence into a pre-existing narrative.
Absolutely. Now, you also included a piece by researcher William Law, reflecting on his experience interviewing key witnesses involved in JFK's autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Yes, I found those firsthand accounts incredibly compelling. They really humanize the story. What was it about these interviews that stood out to Law?
He was driven by a desire to go beyond the official reports and documents. He wanted to hear directly from those who were present to see their reactions and form his own judgment about the possibility of a conspiracy.
So he was on a personal fact-finding mission, seeking the truth that might lie hidden between the lines of the official narrative.
Exactly. He focuses on his interactions with four specific witnesses: Gerald Custer, the X-ray technician; Paul O'Connor and James Curtis Jenkins, both lab technicians; and Dennis David, the chief of the day at Bethesda. What's fascinating is how Law describes the impact of these interviews. It's not just about the facts they shared, but the emotions they conveyed, the lingering doubts and uncertainties that they carried with them all these years later.
Even though they were medical professionals trained to be objective, the experience of being involved in such a momentous and tragic event clearly left a lasting impression on them.
Absolutely. For example, Law describes Custer's unwavering belief in a conspiracy based on his analysis of the X-rays, despite facing pressure to conform to the official narrative. He also mentions O'Connor's certainty that JFK's body arrived at the morgue in a body bag, a detail that contradicts some aspects of the official timeline.
And then there's Jenkins, the lab technician, who vividly described the scene as the autopsy doctors unwrapped JFK's head. That image stuck with me.
Law recounts how Jenkins's emotional description of that moment, the blood-soaked towels, the sheer brutality of the head wound, reinforced his own doubts about the lone gunman theory.
It's a stark reminder that behind the official reports and the clinical language of investigations, there were real people grappling with the gruesome aftermath of a national tragedy.
And Law doesn't shy away from describing the emotional toll these interviews took on him. He talks about feeling a sense of responsibility, a weight of history, as he listened to these witnesses share their experiences.
It's one thing to read about historical events in textbooks or articles, but it's another thing entirely to hear those stories directly from the people who lived through them. It makes history come alive in a whole new way. It's clear that these excerpts from the Dealey Plaza Echo don't shy away from exploring the more controversial or speculative aspects of the assassination.
You're right. Remember Sherry Angel's interview where she claimed to have seen LBJ and Jack Ruby together? That definitely added fuel to the conspiracy fire.
Yes. And whether we choose to believe those claims or not, they remind us of the importance of considering all perspectives, even those that challenge the mainstream narrative. And speaking of alternative perspectives, you also included an article that explored the fascinating coincidences between the assassinations of Lincoln and Kennedy, particularly focusing on their vice presidents, both named Johnson.
That's right. This piece dives into the startling parallels in their lives and presidencies, from their turbulent vice presidencies to the accusations and controversies that followed them. It's almost as if history was rhyming, if not repeating itself.
The article also highlighted the irony that despite facing similar circumstances, LBJ informing the Warren Commission seemed to ignore the lessons learned from the inquiry into Lincoln's assassination. It makes you wonder, did we miss an opportunity to learn from the past and potentially uncover a deeper truth?
It's certainly a fascinating question. And while we may never have definitive answers in either case, the similarities are definitely thought-provoking. Now, for a change of pace, you've included a piece of fiction, a short story that offers a unique perspective on the JFK assassination through the lens of a classroom.
Yes. Out of the Mouths of Babes takes place in a chaotic London classroom where a teacher, struggling to control his unteachable students, decides to use a jackdaw educational package about the JFK assassination to engage them.
I remember those jackdaw packs. They were always a fun way to learn about history.
Right, so what happens in the story? Do the students just ignore the lesson?
Not at all. They become utterly captivated, analyzing the evidence and questioning the official narrative with a level of critical thinking that even their teacher didn't anticipate.
Okay, so they weren't just interested in the sensational aspects of the assassination. They were actually thinking critically about the evidence. What kind of insights did they have?
They express skepticism about the lone gunman theory and the magic bullet, pointing out inconsistencies in the official account and questioning Oswald's marksmanship and the improbable trajectory of the bullet.
So in a way, they were more perceptive than the Warren Commission.
The story certainly suggests that. And it ends with one of the students approaching the teacher after class with a question, indicating that the event had a deeper impact on him than anyone realized.
I love how this fictional story uses a simple classroom setting to explore those complex themes of historical truth, evidence, and the power of critical thinking. It shows us that engaging with history doesn't have to be dry and academic. It can be thought-provoking and even entertaining.
And it's a reminder that sometimes the most insightful perspectives come from unexpected sources. Now let's move on to a different kind of analysis. You included an intriguing piece that delves into the world of the Bethesda autopsy witnesses.
Yes, I found those firsthand accounts so powerful. They really put a human face on this historical event.
Absolutely. The author of this piece, William Law, was driven by a desire to go beyond the official reports and documents. He wanted to hear directly from those who were present during the autopsy. He wanted to look into their eyes, hear their voices, and form his own judgment about the possibility of a conspiracy.
So he was on a quest for truth, seeking out those who were closest to the event itself.
Exactly. He focuses on his interactions with 4 specific witnesses: Gerald Custer, the X-ray technician, Paul O'Connor and James Curtis Jenkins, both lab technicians, and Dennis David, the chief of the day at Bethesda. What makes Law's account so compelling is that it's not just about the facts they shared, but also the emotions they conveyed, the lingering doubts and uncertainties that they still carried with them all these years later.
It's remarkable how even for medical professionals trained to be objective, being involved in such a momentous and tragic event would leave such a deep and lasting impact. Can you share some specific examples of what stood out to Law in these interviews?
He was struck by Custer's unwavering belief in a conspiracy based on his analysis of the X-rays, despite facing pressure to conform to the official narrative. He also mentions O'Connor's absolute certainty that JFK's body arrived at the morgue in a body bag, a detail that contradicts some aspects of the official timeline.
And I remember Jenkins, the lab technician who provided such a vivid description of the scene as the autopsy doctors unwrapped JFK's head.
Yes, Law recounts how Jenkins's emotional description of that moment, the blood-soaked towels, the sheer brutality of the head wound, reinforced his own doubts about the lone gunman theory.
These accounts drive home the point that behind the official reports and dry clinical language of investigations, there were real people grappling with the gruesome aftermath of a national tragedy.
Absolutely. Law doesn't shy away from describing the emotional toll these interviews took on him either. He talks about feeling a sense of responsibility, a weight of history, as he listened to these witnesses share their experiences.
It's one thing to read about historical events in books or articles, but it's another thing entirely to hear those stories directly from the people who lived through them. It brings history alive in a whole new way. It's remarkable how these excerpts from the Dealey Plaza Echo weave together historical analysis, scientific evidence, eyewitness accounts, and personal reflections to paint such a multifaceted picture of the assassination.
What's fascinating is how these seemingly disparate pieces, when examined together, often point toward a narrative that challenges or expands upon the official story.
It's like assembling a complex puzzle where each piece adds a new layer of depth and complexity.
And as we saw with Sherry Angel's interview, this journal doesn't shy away from exploring the more controversial or speculative aspects of the assassination.
Right. And while we might not necessarily accept those claims as fact, they demonstrate the importance of keeping an open mind and considering all perspectives.
Exactly. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from challenging the conventional wisdom and exploring those areas where the official narrative seems to fall short.
It's all about asking the tough questions, digging deeper into the evidence, and never settling for easy answers.
And speaking of asking tough questions, you also included an article that examines a topic that has always fascinated those who study the JFK assassination: the curious parallels between the deaths of Lincoln and Kennedy.
Yes. That article really caught my attention. It goes beyond just the shared name of their vice presidents, Johnson, and dives into the broader historical context.
It highlights some truly eerie coincidences between the two assassinations, from the day of the week to the nature of the wounds. And it delves into the parallels between the two Johnsons, both of whom faced turbulent vice presidencies and accusations of being involved in the events surrounding their predecessors' deaths.
It's almost like history was rhyming, if not repeating itself.
And what's especially intriguing is the article's observation that, despite facing similar circumstances, LBJ, informing the Warren Commission, seemed to ignore the lessons learned from the inquiry into Lincoln's assassination.
You're suggesting that perhaps there were missed opportunities to apply what was learned from Lincoln's assassination to the investigation into Kennedy's death?
That's what the article proposes. It's a thought-provoking question, isn't it? Did we miss a chance to learn from the past and potentially uncover a deeper truth?
It's certainly something to ponder. Now, switching gears entirely, you included a piece of fiction in your source material. A short story that offers a unique perspective on the JFK assassination through the eyes of a teacher and his students.
Yes, Out of the Mouths of Babes takes place in a chaotic London classroom where a teacher uses a jackdaw educational package about the assassination to try to engage his so-called unteachable students.
I remember those jackdaw packs. They were always a fun way to learn about history.
Absolutely. And in this story, the students become completely engrossed in the material, analyzing the evidence and questioning the official narrative with a level of critical thinking that surprises even their teacher.
So they weren't just interested in the more sensational aspects of the assassination, they were actually thinking critically about the evidence.
Exactly. They express skepticism about the lone gunman theory and the magic bullet, pointing out inconsistencies in the official account. They questioned Oswald's marksmanship and the improbable trajectory of the bullet.
It's almost as if these London school kids were more astute than the Warren Commission.
That's the point the story seems to be making. And it ends with one of the students approaching the teacher after class with a question, indicating that the events of the assassination had a deeper impact on him than anyone realized.
I love how this fictional story uses a simple classroom setting to explore such complex themes of historical truth, evidence, and the power of critical thinking. It's a great reminder that sometimes the most profound insights come from unexpected sources. And it speaks to the importance of engaging with history in a way that encourages questioning and critical analysis, even at a young age.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's touch on one more piece of source material you provided. It's an item from the journal's Odds and Ends section.
Yes, I always find those little snippets fascinating. They often offer unexpected connections or glimpses into lesser-known aspects of the case.
This particular item discusses the legal significance of eyewitness testimony versus camera footage, especially in the context of the Zapruder film.
Ah, the Zapruder film.
Yeah.
For our listener, this was the home movie that captured the assassination as it happened. It's been analyzed frame by researchers for decades. What's the journal's take on the legal implications of this footage?
It raises the question of which holds more weight in a court of law: the testimony of a person who witnessed the event or the seemingly objective record of a camera. Eyewitness accounts are often subjective, filtered through memory and emotion. Camera footage, on the other hand, can seem more definitive and irrefutable.
But as we've seen, even camera footage can be open to interpretation, especially when you're dealing with grainy images, limited angles, and the inherent ambiguity of a chaotic event.
Precisely. The Zapruder film, despite being the most complete visual record of the assassination, has been subject to endless analysis and debate. Some argue that it supports the official narrative, while others see evidence of a conspiracy hidden within its frames.
It's a reminder that even the most objective evidence can be subjective when viewed through different lenses.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of considering all forms of evidence, eyewitness accounts, physical evidence, photographic and film records, and weighing their relative strengths and weaknesses.
It's like piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle, where some pieces might be missing or damaged. We have to carefully examine each piece, looking for clues and connections, even when the overall picture remains elusive.
And sometimes the most important insights emerge not from the pieces themselves, but from the spaces in between, from the gaps in our knowledge and the questions that remain unanswered.
This deep dive has certainly given us a lot to think about. It's fascinating how these seemingly disparate pieces of information, when woven together, can create such a complex and nuanced understanding of the JFK assassination.
It's a reminder that history is never simple or straightforward. It's a tapestry woven from multiple threads, each contributing to the overall narrative, and often challenging us to reconsider what we thought we knew.
I can't wait to see what other insights we uncover in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our final part of our deep dive into the JFK assassination. We've been exploring the fascinating excerpts you provided from the Dealey Plaza Echo journal.
It's amazing how each piece adds a new layer of complexity to this event, revealing just how much there is to uncover beyond the official narrative.
Yeah, it's like we've been peeling back layers of an onion, and with every layer we find more questions than answers. But that's what makes this such a captivating subject, isn't it? The pursuit of truth is often a winding path full of unexpected twists and turns.
Speaking of twists and turns, you included an article that explores those chilling coincidences between the assassinations of Presidents Lincoln and Kennedy,
Right.
focusing on their vice presidents.
Yeah.
It's hard to dismiss the similarities as mere chance, especially when you consider the shared last name Johnson.
Yeah, it goes beyond just names and dates. The article delves into the startling parallels in their lives and presidencies, from their tumultuous vice presidencies to the accusations and controversies that followed them.
We touched on this earlier, but it's worth revisiting. What are some of the most striking parallels that stood out to you?
Well, both Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's VP, and Lyndon B. Johnson, JFK's VP, faced accusations of being involved in the events surrounding their predecessors' deaths. Andrew Johnson was criticized for his perceived lack of action after Lincoln's assassination, while LBJ's alleged role in the JFK assassination has been the subject of intense scrutiny and speculation.
It's almost as if assuming the presidency after such a traumatic event casts a shadow of suspicion on the successor, regardless of their actual involvement.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if that suspicion is a natural human response to such a momentous and tragic event, or if there's something more deeply ingrained in the nature of power itself. Perhaps it's the sudden vacuum created by a presidential assassination, the sense of instability and uncertainty that fuels these suspicions.
It's a fascinating question, and one that we might never have a definitive answer to, but it certainly adds another layer of intrigue to the stories of both Lincoln and Kennedy. Now, for our final piece, you provided us with a book review that takes a unique approach to the JFK assassination.
Yes, the book is November Patriots, The Murder of John F. Kennedy by Constance Christberg and Larry Hancock. It's a fascinating blend of fiction and nonfiction, a novel interwoven with real historical details and documents.
I've always found that combination intriguing. It can make history more accessible and engaging for those who might find traditional historical accounts a bit dry. What's the overall goal of the book?
The authors wanted to reach a wider audience, those who might be curious about the JFK assassination, but overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information out there.
Yeah, I can see that. It can feel like falling down a rabbit hole with endless theories and interpretations. So how does the book attempt to strike that balance between engaging readers and presenting factual information?
The fictional narrative provides a compelling story that draws the reader in, while the full disclosure section delves into the evidence supporting a conspiracy theory. It's like a two-pronged approach, appealing to both the heart and the head.
It sounds like a valuable resource for anyone interested in exploring the JFK assassination from a different perspective, particularly those who are new to the vast world of research and alternative theories surrounding this event.
The reviewer acknowledges the inherent challenges of blending fiction and nonfiction, especially with such a sensitive and controversial topic. But they also praised the authors for making the material accessible and for including personal accounts and documents that might not be readily available to the average reader.
It's like they've curated a collection of evidence and woven it into a compelling narrative that encourages readers to question the official story and explore alternative possibilities.
And as we wrap up our deep dive into the Dealey Plaza Echo,
Yeah.
I think this book review serves as a fitting reminder. The conversation about the JFK assassination is far from over. New books, articles, and documentaries continue to emerge, prompting us to re-examine what we think we know and to keep searching for answers.
You know, after diving into all this material with you, I'm struck by how much the JFK assassination is about more than just the events of that one fateful day in Dallas. It's a story about power, secrecy, and the elusive nature of truth. It's a story that continues to resonate with us because it speaks to some of the most fundamental questions we grapple with as a society. Who do we trust? Who holds the power? And how do we know what's real in a world saturated with information and misinformation?
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
And it's why this topic, even decades later, continues to fascinate us. The JFK assassination is a mirror reflecting back our own anxieties about the world.
Yeah.
The lingering sense that perhaps we don't know the full story, that there are forces at play behind the scenes that shape our lives in ways we can't fully comprehend.
It's a chilling thought, but also a powerful reminder of the importance of critical thinking, of questioning the narratives we're given and seeking out alternative perspectives.
Precisely. And I think that's the most valuable takeaway from this deep dive. As you continue your own exploration of the JFK assassination, remember to approach the subject with an open mind,
Yeah.
a healthy dose of skepticism,
Yeah.
and a willingness to consider all possibilities.
Don't be afraid to question the official narrative, to dig deeper into the evidence, and to seek out those hidden connections that might lead to a more complete understanding of this pivotal event in American history. The pursuit of truth is a journey, and sometimes the most rewarding discoveries are those that challenge our assumptions and force us to re-examine everything we thought we knew.
You couldn't put it better myself. Thank you for embarking on this deep dive with us. And remember, the truth, whatever it may be, is worth pursuing.